Hi, I'm Janet Salmons, and I'm happy to be joined today by Natalia Chavez. And we're going to talk about our experiences collaborating across all kinds of boundaries. Would you like to just briefly introduce yourself?
Of course, I am Natalia Chavez. Thank you, Janet. I am an intercultural and qualitative research consultant, and I also work as a lecturer at the Family Medicine and Public Health Department at the Universidad de La Sabana here in Colombia.
So the two things we want to talk with you about today, one is about how we can learn together when we collaborate across boundaries, and how we can support each other's research and academic work across boundaries. And we're speaking with you about our personal experience here. But first, let's begin with this definition of a collaboration that I've used in my writing. So here you talk about as an interactive process that engages two or more people to work together to achieve something they couldn't achieve on their own. So sometimes those may be specific outcomes, like a piece of writing that we're working on together, a project we're doing. But in the collaboration we're talking with you about today is much more informal. You know, we're not trying to create a specific outcome from our exchange. But as we look at this model, that again is from my writing about collaboration, you know, to think a little bit about, you know, why and how people collaborate, that, you know, sometimes we are assigned to a collaboration. We're mandated because perhaps funding requires that we have particular stakeholders. We might not know those people. We might not trust those people. Maybe we don't even like them, but, you know, we are going to, you know, work together in a particular project. Then in the middle column, we have strategic, where there's a need to have particular perspectives or representation or skill sets on a project. And so we come together in that kind of strategic way. And that's how we met. We came together to work on the development of a webinar for Sage Method Space with Dr. Cheryl Poth as the other panelist. And then out of that, we developed a more personal and informal kind of collaboration that would be described by this term emergent, that, you know, it comes out of, we meet someone, we feel like, you know, we have things in common, we enjoy working together, you know, we have a common interest or a common goal. And here, you know, it's much more at the individual and personal level. Is there anything you would like to add?
No.
So, you know, when we start to think about, you know, whether it's a, you know, one-on-one kind of personal type of collaboration, or more of an organizational, or maybe a, you know, at a team level where we have, you know, multiple people involved, it's very different if we're collaborating, you know, within our group versus across groups. However you want to define the group, could be the place where you live, it could be your discipline, it could be your culture, your language, norms, you know, the way that you solve problems, what you're accustomed to in terms of how you get things done and how you communicate. You know, when we're working within a group where it's familiar, you know, we can kind of jump right in and use almost shorthand to just, you know, get going with a project. But, you know, when we're starting to go across those boundaries, for one thing, we need to understand what those boundaries are and look at, you know, where are the common interests across those boundaries, even if, you know, all of the other things are very different. But that all takes time. And so, you know, if for those listening, as you're thinking about collaborative projects that you would like to start, or those that you might be engaged with, the more of those kinds of factors that are in place, the more boundaries you're leaping across, the more that you need to pay attention to taking some time to get things going, to get acquainted, to get started, to find out where people are coming from, what their priorities are, what their issues are, what their dilemmas are, and then, paying some attention to the nature of the collaboration. So, for example, with the more strategic collaboration we were engaged with to plan this webinar, we had other people involved that, we had timing issues and deadlines and technology that we needed to work out in order to accomplish that project. So, as we think about all of these kinds of things, to me, they're really, of the utmost importance today. I mean, this goal is part of the UN climate agreement. And there, there is a recognition that, being able to, work across boundaries is really essential. And, we are all in this together. And we've certainly learned that in the past year, dealing with the COVID pandemic, where, we can't just say, well, I'm going to just deal with my own stuff and, lock everyone else out. So, at the heart of this, to me, there is the factor of trust. Sometimes that comes naturally, and sometimes we really need to make an effort to try to build that. But I think when, in terms of our collaboration, that, part of the trust building is that, especially working in a strategic situation, that you kind of get a sense, okay, here's a partner who is going to do what they say they're going to do. And, I can count on them to come through with what is needed. So there's that aspect of just thinking like, okay, that we can do things together. But there's also, I think, a sense of real kind of respect, that there's that reciprocity and mutuality in that initial definition that I shared with you. And when I heard you speak about your research for the webinar that we did, that, really intrigued me and made me want to learn more. And also, I think, kind of built your credibility in terms of just, doing such interesting work. And for us, where I'm working, as you could see from what I've just shared, at a somewhat abstract level, that, you're really in the thick of it. So why don't you share with our audience a little bit about your research?
Thank you, Janet. Since the first time you approached to me in this strategic collaborative setting, I felt so excited and comfortable to collaborate. Now that I hear you, I believe it is because of that place of trust and respect from which you approach to all of us, I suppose, with whom you work this way in method space particularly. And this experience of collaboration we have had has helped me to understand my own work from that perspective. So as a community psychologist, collaboration and partnership is central to develop community-based research and action, which is always driven by specific values and that has to respond to specific contexts and needs. And also as an intercultural consultant and educator, I've been focusing on this competence, we can say, which is cultural humility, almost always understood as an individual competence. And I have been trying to understand it in my work with students, with organizations and communities for whom I work. And for me, it has become an ethical and political principle guiding research and action that I had to be accountable in different levels and in all my relationships. And cultural humility implies that we assume a non-expert role, that we recognize the power imbalances in our relationship that can be based on gender or race or class, and also to focus on others' expertise for partnership. It could be your client or a community or a student. And that is what allow us to to build trust. So partnership is crucial for building common objectives and constructing methodologies that work for everybody and allow us to achieve our goals in community settings. And that's why when you approach from that place of respect and trust as an expert,
Mm-hmm.
it put me in a way in the place of the people I work with, or I hope that is the place I can give to them. I feel the power that arises when someone you admire and you consider an expert considers you an expert as well. And how when our work is seen again with curiosity, that changes the way we see our work again. And that is what happened in this case. I'm going to share with you now, if you want to. I was invited to evaluate the cultural approach of psychosocial strategy. This strategy works in the Pacific region with indigenous and Afro-Colombian war victims that are massively being displaced despite our peace agreements we signed in 2016. And I also had to work with psychosocial practitioners who are on field because we were in the middle of COVID and I was not going to be able to travel. So we really needed to collaborate remotely. So now I'm going to tell you how we do it in the next slide. As I told you before, I had to take in mind cultural humility as a principle. And for that, I chose not a traditional evaluation strategy, but a systematization of experiences methodology, which is a Latin American participatory action research methodology that help us to collectively learn from praxis, and which is based in a collaborative plan and development. We can go to the next one. So I think the first focus group we developed was crucial for the rest of what happened, because it was a huge challenge working in these conditions I told you before. So in the first online focus group, I presented this methodology, the systematization of experiences methodology. And I was clear that I didn't want to evaluate as an expert their work. I wanted I wanted to find exemplar intercultural experiences and to show them to their bosses and donors around the world. And for that, we needed to make a research team, and changing the frame of a traditional evaluation to a systematization of experiences, which is strength-based, made a safe space for dialogue and for participation with them. And they were so important to us experts in all the decision-making process. They guided the ethical principles and the methodological concerns throughout the research process. After that, we had some online interviews with them. We made timelines to identify these experiences that were going to be exemplar of their work. We also developed telephonic interviews, and these practitioners, applied the most significant change technique, which is also based on what is working and not what is failing, right? And there we could share power throughout the process with this research team, and we could gather in virtual scenarios with different kind of actors. I believe that the final workshop was also very important, because after we had these results and we also checked them, we did member checking with them, we did a final workshop to present these exemplar experiences to their bosses and the international community. And that way we are sure that they had a benefit from participating in this research process. I think we can go to the next slide. So as you were saying, when we had all these different boundaries that we have here, online settings, other kind of settings, cultural settings, we had to work with organization and also in the community level. We really had to be very careful and to respect and to take into considerations and to anticipate a lot of risks. So the concern, thinking in mind the concern for welfare that Jury Potts presents, we anticipated some risks. With practitioners, we identified what information we could share and what information we could not share on online settings in work context. With community members, we tried to reduce the risk of underrepresentation. We couldn't do that as well as we wanted because some communities and some participants like midwives and healers and elders, they could not participate in this with this technology and also in these methodologies. They speak and they participate in their own methodologies, in their own indigenous methodologies. And we also had to think about the privacy, the protection of the privacy, and what kind of information we were going to share, and if it was going to be anonymous or not. And of course, it wasn't anonymous because we wanted to share the successful experiences. And indigenous leaders and Afro-Colombian leaders, they wanted to speak for themselves. They wanted me to give them their voice. And and lastly, we did member checking again. Then we had into consideration the justice, the concern for justice. We tried to make this research, the participation, a fair participation and equitable participation in both levels, organizational and community level. But as I told you before, we couldn't reach everybody. And for equitable and fair treatment in reporting, well, we acknowledge the authorship of these experiences. We were not the authors of what was working. And we also made a piece, an article that we had the opportunity to publish, and we write it with different representatives of the community level, the organizational level, the students, and myself. And we did a lot of reflexive practice throughout the process, being the most important member checking with participants and checking our research bias as the privilege that we had, for example. I think that's it.
Well, it's so interesting to hear the experiences that you have and what the kinds of challenges that you need to work through. And I think, as we've discussed before, what we are encouraging you as our audience to think about is, how can you, yes, everyone's busy, but, as you encounter people who are doing, work that relates to your interests, or you have mutual interests, how can you support each other and look for these opportunities to learn from one another, in an informal way? We just have found this really beneficial and just a tremendous learning experience.
Yes, I believe that this curiosity that we have as social researchers or any field that you work in, well, it should be alive in all our relationship with our colleagues. What I felt when you approached to me this curiosity about my work and the curiosity I have about your work, it makes that, I don't know, we have a lot of open windows to collaborate now. And every time I speak with you, I have got new ideas of my own work and also of how I would love to collaborate with you. It's unstoppable.
Well, I hope that those who are watching will share some experiences you've had and any resources that you've encountered that make collaboration work more successfully.